Faith Dialogue, a public affairs program at the crossroads of religion and life, a series highlighting the cultural and social interaction between the worshiping and religious communities in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KTVC. Join us now in Austin Faith Dialogue. Hello, I'm Richard Thompson, pastor of Central Presbyterian Church, and your host for this edition of Austin Faith Dialogue. Today we come to a little-known fact about our community, and that is how it's the home to at least two nationally distributed religious publications. These are the Clergy Journal, published and edited by Manfred Hulk, Jr., whom we welcome to our broadcast, and also Clyde W. Chestnut, who produces Windows of Truth, a newsletter of sermon illustrations, and whom we also welcome. Clyde and Manfred, we're delighted to have you here. And I think that we need to start with you, Manfred, insofar as you were born in Austin.
Yes.
Went away for some period of time and then returned.
Right.
And tell us something about your pilgrimage to becoming editor and publisher of the Clergy Journal.
All right. When I was about 45 years old, I decided that I needed to do something about the planning for my retirement, and also something to do with respect to getting out of the 8-to-5 rat race that I was in a church job. I was not pastor then, as I had been earlier in my career. And so back in the mid-'70s, I purchased the Clergy Journal magazine from the existing editor at that time and started building it up. And then about 5 years later, I decided that, gee, this was going great. I could support myself, perhaps in part, on the proceeds from this magazine. And so in 1980, I moved back to Austin. And I came back because that had been my objective. My wife and I both grew up here, and we wanted to live here. And a magazine can be published almost anywhere you want it published.
I see.
So Austin was a natural place to come. Now, the magazine is not printed here. It's printed in Seymour, Indiana, and all the typesetting and mailing of the magazine is done there. But I got my career began really as a parish pastor over 30 years ago, and then I had also passed the exam for the Certified Public Accountant, so I'm a CPA also. So both of those professions have been good. And I have been able to combine them in everything that I have been able to do. I never took a course in journalism, so I didn't know anything about publishing until I got into it. But it's been fascinating, and that's what I do practically full-time now.
Yes. Well, I think that you're obviously a multi-talented person to do both the church work, the publishing, and being an accountant. And Clyde, you've, I understand, have done some journalistic work before you did this, and before you're currently a pastor as well. Is that correct?
Yes.
Whereabouts is that?
I'm a pastor now of the Lake Travis United Methodist Church out on 620 near Lakeway and Lake Travis. Previously, I have been an associate editor of the United Methodist Reporter in Dallas, which is a national newspaper published by the church, and about 500,000 circulation each week. And I was an associate editor there and learned a lot about journalism. But I decided to do this Windows to Truth, which is a collection of stories and illustrations for pastors to use in their sermons or teachers to use in their talks or for whatever purpose, because I use a lot of stories when I preach, and I have borrowed heavily from books and periodicals through the years, and so I just decided maybe I could take this collection that I had gathered and share it with others, and it's turned into a nice hobby. It doesn't support me, but it's a nice hobby.
And in place of playing golf or going fishing?
Yes.
Well, I think that the extent to which I've had a chance to look at both of your publications, and in terms of the Clergy Journal, Manfred, here's one particular issue that has articles like clergy malpractice, clergy compensation, church budget development, and then one on a sermon series in the Old Testament.
Yes.
So it seems like, just from the emphasis here that this is more on church administration and management.
Not necessarily. Our emphasis is twofold, as you've indicated. We try to have half of the magazine approximately relating to preaching, and the other half relating to church management, church administration, how to be a more effective and efficient pastor of a congregation. And on the cover, we usually highlight some articles on preaching and some articles on administration. Mm-hmm. But our magazine is read by all kinds of people, primarily mainline Protestant groups, but not exclusively, certainly. And with 18,000 readers, we have, quite a variety, or would have quite a variety of people who are looking at it. And they're interested in the preaching helps, the illustrations that Clyde Chestnut provides for us, the sermons that are written for us, and then also they're interested particularly in tax matters that I write on income taxes for ministers. And then we have an author who is writing on church law, which seems to be of interest to a lot of people. And some people read the magazine just because of that, even though the preaching comes along with it.
Sure. Well, you've got 18,000 subscribers.
Right.
Mostly Protestant, but you have Catholic.
Yes. We have Roman Catholics, and we have Jewish rabbis who read the magazine as well.
Libraries subscribe to it?
Yes, quite a few libraries subscribe to the magazine also. Most all of the seminaries would subscribe to it, yes.
Well, now, one thing that I have to say caught my attention were your cartoons.
Oh, okay. A lot of people like those cartoons.
There's this one that shows a fellow that asleep, minister. He never gives a sermon without sleeping on it first. And I have to say that as a minister, that made me think twice.
Okay, good.
I mean, the creative process is one thing, but just going to sleep on the job is another.
Yes.
And what's the function of that besides just giving it the light touch?
Well, I don't take any credit for the ideas that go into those cartoons, of course. But what I try to do is provide some light touches to the magazine, but also try to pick out cartoons that do have a message that ministers will read. And often these ministers like to cut them out and post them on bulletin boards because they have messages to the people, too, who come to church on Sunday morning. But the cartoons, I have about 5 or so different artists who regularly send me a dozen cartoons every month or so, and I sort through those, and I'll pick 1 or 2 or 3 out of a packet and send the rest of them back. And I like to pick out cartoons that maybe poke fun a little bit at the minister, but cartoons that are related to preaching, cartoons that are related to church attendance, cartoons that relate to Moses giving the 10 Commandments, and there's all kinds of cartoons that relate to that. And then also cartoons that might have some relationship between religion and the church and income taxes.
Oh, I see. Yeah, well,
some of them do.
Whether in the religion field or otherwise, the income tax is a common denominator.
Right.
And of course, the work that you do is you're working with word pictures, Clyde, as distinct from graphics of this sort.
That's true.
What's your source for these?
I try to look everywhere and find stories, usually those that are in print, but I subscribe to about 81 periodicals. I read maybe half a dozen books a week. I also watch television, go to plays, just pick up ideas for stories, pick up the stories themselves just any place that I can.
Well, I want to ask you, for instance, there's one here that I thought would be worth sharing with the viewers because I think it shows something of the wit that you have picked up on here. A minister noticed a group of boys standing around a small stray dog. "What are you doing, boys?" asked the minister. "Telling lies," said one of the boys. "The one who tells the biggest lie gets the dog." "Why, when I was your age," the shocked minister said, "I never ever thought of telling a lie." The boys looked at one another, a little crestfallen. Finally, one of them shrugged and said, "I guess he wins the dog." So where did you get that?
Usually I give the source, but of jokes like that, I have read that joke at least 4 different times in 4 different publications, and therefore no one publication
I see. That's why it didn't
gets
have
the credit. That's why it does not have a credit line. Jokes are recycled about every generation. They seem to come around again. And I have some stories that I've come across in recent publications that I have in my files 20 years ago, and they're just now coming around again. So jokes I usually don't credit, but the rest of the stories I do, mainly because they're taken from print sources. A lot of print sources have copyrights, so I, of necessity, have to write for permission to use those.
For each one of those that you use, you have to get the permission of the publisher.
Usually that's so.
Well, let's just focus for a minute on illustrations as intrinsic to faith. The fact that you focused on that. I heard once a statement of someone who had illustrations looking in search of a sermon, and that some preaching is just illustrations connected together, but that the sermons that don't have illustrations are just deadly dull, abstract, doctrinal, tend to be that way. So was it that need on your part as a pastor to give color and...
Yes. As you know, Jesus used stories all the time. Someone asked him one time, who is my neighbor? And he said, well, a man was going down to Jericho, fell among thieves, was beaten and left to die, and a priest and a rabbi passed by on the other side, but a good Samaritan stopped. So this is the story that we call the Good Samaritan. When Jesus finished telling that story, he said, now who was neighbor to the man who fell among thieves? The lawyer said, well, the man who stopped to help him. And Jesus said, go thou and do likewise. So as one reads through the New Testament, you find Jesus using story after story after story to tell points and to get across his message. Because of that, ministers and teachers for the centuries have been able to do the same thing. They've been looking for stories. So what I do is collect a lot of stories through my reading, and I share them through my own publication, Windows to Truth, which I see as a story as a window that you look through to see what's going on the other side. And you see through this story to the truth. The truth, I believe, is the message of Jesus Christ and the gospel. And the minister who is proclaiming that uses this window, this little story, to help a viewer see the truth.
Well, I think that the extent to which you have perceived the power of a story, it seems to me that one of the things that, whether we're consciously identifying it or not, but it has a subliminal message. It has a power to get under the skin. And my guess is that in Jesus' case, or in case of the great rabbis in the Talmud, or in any of the world religions, there is a perception that a story will communicate in a way that simple abstractions won't. And
what I look for in a story is, first, does it have an aha quality? Oh, I didn't think of that. Or, wow, if it is alive, if it catches you like that. The second thing I look for is, is it authentic? Is it genuine? Did it happen to an individual, or could it happen to an individual? Occasionally I'll use once upon a time stories, which are folklore and that sort of thing, but mostly I try to find stories that have rootage in everyday, common, ordinary experiences of human beings. The third thing I look for is, does it have a punch? Does it, usually that can come in the last line, kind of the punch line, or does it make a point that is fairly obvious? And the fourth thing that I look for is, it's short. I cannot use long stories or shaggy dog stories. Or mine are kind of like Life in These United States that's in Reader's Digest, you know, those short. Those are the ideal ones that I look for.
Well, Manfred, don't you find that you have sort of the same criterion as...
Yes, and I think that if you would examine the sermons that we publish in the Clergy Journal magazine, and we do publish 2 complete sets of sermons for every Sunday of the year just in the magazine, plus an extra 30 sermons. So we've got 150 or more, 250 or more sermons that we publish every year just in the magazine. And I think that if you looked at those, you would discover that the preachers that I like to use are those who use illustrations in precisely the way that Clyde has suggested. And our readers have commented from time to time that they like this writer or this preacher or this writer-preacher because of the illustrations that they've been able to take out of the particular sermons that we've published. Yes, we do find that to be a very important part of sermonizing, the illustrations.
Well, now, how would your journal be different from some of the other national, like the Christian Century or Christianity Today or some of the others that have got a national scope?
Well, our magazine, first of all, is aimed primarily at parish pastors. So that's our audience. We do have some church administrators, but primarily parish pastors, people who are pastoring a congregation. So we try to give them information that is helpful to them. It is not intended for lay readers in the sense that we don't publish devotionals, we don't publish materials that have some sort of a theme that lay people might be interested in. We usually don't publish a lot that's controversial either, although sometimes we have. But I look at our magazine as being different from other magazines because it concentrates on preaching and on administration. It is not just a preaching magazine. It is not just church administration.
I noticed one of the features in your magazine is article by Clyde.
Yes.
His illustrations are contained in one of the pages that are in each of your issues.
Yes, Clyde's been one of our regular contributors for almost 10 years now, and we have a complete page in each issue of illustrations that he provides to us, which are not duplicated, he tells us, in Windows to Truth in any way. So they're different from anything else that he publishes, and we appreciate that, and our readers do too, and it's used, and we highlight it, put bold lines around it, and make it stand out, and people do use that.
So you're glad to have another outlet for your material, Clyde?
Yes, very definitely. As much as I can share like that, I've always appreciated it, and so I like to share it. I also have a column in the Circuit Rider, which is a publication that goes to United Methodist pastors, and it's another page of stories and illustrations. So I have to produce about 25 stories a month for the 3 publications that I write for.
And that's in addition to your preaching every week at your church.
That's right, and I borrow out of that.
Yes.
It just feeds my own preaching, which I appreciate and like.
Yes, well, I suspect that you could win the most illustrated preacher in Travis and Williamson County combined. And
maybe so.
I think we've come across a gold mine here, Manfred, for that material. And I know that the word must spread. How many readers or subscribers do you have?
A little less than 700.
And how does that compare with when you started? I mean, has it been a growing kind of thing?
It grows, yes, it's grown.
And having an article in your publication, Manfred, probably helps the exposure on that.
Yes.
For Clyde.
I assume it does, and what we have tried to do in the case of Clyde's article, as well as other columns that are written by people who have some other publication, is to include their name, obviously the name, but also their address, their mailing address, so that people can correspond directly with them. We are able to do that usually for most of these writers, and that helps to give them exposure, and it's very important, I think, for them, and we like to do that too, for their benefit.
Well, I'd like to expose our viewers to another one of the light touches in one of your issues about, in this case, having to do with children in church, and apparently an usher picking up those paper airplanes and saying, "Ah, yes, the little aeronautical engineer from the Sunday school balcony." And now, Clyde, you've you're a pastor, and you see kids in church and
Yes.
know they're. Would you say that's a rather accurate description of?
Definitely. I have picked up many an airplane. We don't have a balcony, but I've picked up paper airplanes as well.
And isn't that doing, in a sense, exactly what verbally you're doing in regard to lifting up the life of the church in a sort of a non-pious setting, and a jolt of reality comes as people perceive church life as not really being something that's spoken with a stained glass voice.
True, very true.
And anything that makes the life of faith real and everyday. This is one reason that I read both of your publications, as a matter of fact, because I've found that it's important to have the theological heavy emphasis on the theory of the faith, but apart from the practice, that does stay otherworldly. And I think that's what I see in common between both of your publications. And speaking of being this worldly, the next one shows a minister that looking in on an ice cream parlor, and the wife saying to him, "If you're looking for a subject for Sunday's sermons, how about temptation?" You mean to say, fellows, that ministers are tempted?
It must be.
And as you write prepare your publication for instance, business,
Yes.
you're talking about or computers in the church or administration. This is a long way from temptation.
Well, temptation, the pastors are often tempted, in a sense, not to have anything to do with computers, for example. And so we try to provide them with resource materials so that they can understand what a computer is all about and how they can indeed use it in their congregation. But also in temptation, in that subject, we have a regular article on time management and how so many pastors, I believe, procrastinate and just don't organize their time and don't get things done right. So we put in a little blurb, a half a page or so in every issue about how to manage your time more efficiently and more effectively. And we do the same thing on articles on how to preach more effectively and more efficiently, because a pastor is tempted not to prepare or not to be ready for the sermon on Sunday morning, and we try to offer suggestions on how to do that in an efficient and effective way.
So it's a how-to emphasis.
Yes,
And
yes,
across the board.
Right, as I said earlier, we emphasize the how-to in management and in preaching, but we also include the illustrations, and that would be the sermons that would show you, that would tell the readers this is how it's done.
Well, I think that one of the more how-to and usable illustrations came in the form of something that came from Sojourner's magazine that you quoted, called A Model of a Peacemaker. And how a group of invaders came into a village where there was a monk that wouldn't retreat with the rest. You recall how that transpired, and share that with our viewers as an example, I think, of the kind of more than just a method, but a substance.
As I recall, the Chinese officer came in, and the monks had all fled except one of them. And one of them refused to bow down before them. And the officer was so angered that he took his sword and he said, "Do you know that I can run you through with this?" And the monk looked at him and he said, "Do you know that I am one who can let you run me through?" In other words, he was saying that I'm in control, that you do not scare me, that your sword or your gun or whatever you may have, which is a way to talk about the faith that is so strong and so confident that you can withstand any kind of adversary that may come at you.
Well, I'm glad you gave us the flavor of that, because I've also read other magazines that have had sermon illustrations in it, and it's almost like watching religion movies, which are sometimes rather boring. And these have a kind of punch to them that I think that the standards that you set up, that you're you're really meeting that. And I have one other thing before our time is up today about Austin as a place to publish. You'd mentioned earlier you could actually go anywhere to do your publishing.
Yes.
But that there's a surprising amount of publishing here in the city.
Yes, a surprising amount of magazine publishing is done here in Austin. Apparently, there are among several large printers, there's a lot of competition on printing magazines, and it's done quite well, and they are mailed out of Austin quite regularly, and they are well-known national magazines too that would be included in that list. And I was surprised to find that out, because I didn't come to Austin with the idea that this was the ideal place to publish a magazine. I kept printing the magazine in Indiana while I publish it here, because this is where I live and this is where I want to be. But it is interesting and it is surprising.
I've discovered that with my publication, any place that I can find a post office and a printer, that I can get it done, because I do it in my own home on my computer and then take it to the printer to be run off and then mail it. So I have published this particular one in Humble, Texas, and Estes Park, Colorado, and New Braunfels, and Blanco, and now here in Austin, because it's followed me around as I have moved as a pastor.
Just as the Clergy Journal has been published in Cleveland and in North Carolina and in Hopkins, Minnesota, and also now here in Austin.
I see. Well, we're pleased that you all happened to land here tonight at this particular time.
We are too.
And as we bring our discussion to a completion, I'd like to thank both of our participants. And if you'd like more information, you can call the Austin Metropolitan Ministries number, which will be given at the end of the program. Again, on behalf of that AMM, thanks for watching Austin Faith Dialogue. For more information, call Austin Metropolitan Ministries at 472-7627.